Hi, I'm Jeanne Theoharis, a distinguished professor of political science at Brooklyn College of the City University of New York. And today, we're going to clear up some misconceptions about the civil rights movement. People like Martin Luther King will take his Northern supporters to task repeatedly over the 1960s for supporting his work in the South, but being stubborn about refusing to look at their own situation. Movements for school desegregation, for housing desegregation, opening up jobs take place from Brooklyn to Los Angeles, from Pittsburgh to Milwaukee, and they are met with fierce white resistance in these northern cities. Many Northerners may have supported change in the South, but when that change came home, their resistance was firm and unremitting. Most of us learn about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks in school as national heroes, as American heroes. But in the 1950s and 1960s, both were stigmatized, criminalized, and the civil rights movement in general was not approved of by most Americans. The March on Washington, which we celebrate regularly on Martin Luther King Day, was considered by most Americans at the time to be un-American and not a proper way to go about showing your political opinion. The biggest civil rights demonstration took place in New York City in February of 1964, when nearly 500,000 students and teachers basically stayed home from school. The point of the one-day school boycott was to highlight the city's refusal to come up with any sort of comprehensive desegregation plan, even though we're now 10 years after the Brown decision. Many city leaders hated the idea of the boycott. The New York Times called it violent, even though there was nothing violent about the idea of staying out of school. But part of why the city leaders, thought leaders, were so agitated about it was because what students, what teachers, what civil rights activists in the city were saying is we are 10 years after the Brown decision and New York City still has no comprehensive plan for desegregation. Today, we often hear criticism of the young people of Black Lives Matter, that they're unruly, that they're not going about it the right way, that they should listen to the older people who know better. These kinds of criticisms were also wielded at young people in the civil rights movement. And in fact, at key moments in the civil rights movement, it was young people that blazed the trail. In 1952, a 15-year-old by the name of Barbara Johns organized her classmates to go on strike because their high school in Prince Edward County, Virginia, did not have the resources of the white high school across town. But at first, the NAACP came down to advise these young people to not be striking, that this was too dangerous, that it was reckless, that they weren't going to win. And these young people kept striking in 1952 and turned the NAACP to sort of support them, and ultimately this case becomes one of the key cases in Brown. Most of us know Coretta Scott King, but what we don't know about Coretta Scott King was that she actually was more political than Martin Luther King when they met, that part of why they fall in love is because of this shared political commitment, and that on many issues, Coretta Scott King will influence and in many ways lead her husband, particularly around sort of growing opposition to the Vietnam War and a kind of global vision of human rights. In 1964, Martin Luther King will win the Nobel Prize, and it's Coretta Scott King who then sees that they now have a different responsibility to the world and begins to urge her husband to come out against the war in Vietnam. A reporter will ask Martin Luther King, "Did you educate her?" And King will say, "No, she educated me."